What's up, biology students? Mr. Holloway here. In today's video, we're going to explore the process of cellular respiration and the biochemistry that occurs at each stage in this important energy-releasing series of chemical reactions. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria, which are contained within the cells of all eukaryotes, plants, animals, fungi, even single-celled organisms like paramecium. Like chloroplasts, mitochondria are surrounded by a double membrane. The inner membrane of the mitochondria is highly folded, providing a high amount of surface area upon which cellular respiration can occur. In mitochondria, these infoldings are called cristae, and the fluid-filled space in the center of the mitochondria is called the matrix. It is in the matrix and in the cristae of the mitochondria where cellular respiration occurs. Cellular respiration occurs in three stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Each of these stages produces some ATP, but most of the ATP produced during cellular respiration is produced during electron transport, and this is the part of cellular respiration that requires oxygen in order to occur. It's also the part of cellular respiration in which water is produced. Glycolysis does not require oxygen, and actually happens outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm of the cell. During glycolysis, a molecule of glucose is broken down into two molecules of pyruvic acid, which results in a net gain of two ATP molecules as well. The Krebs cycle occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria and also results in a net gain of two ATP molecules. CO2 is also produced during this stage. These arrows represent a few important intermediate products, energy-carrying molecules called NADH and FADH2. These energy-carrying molecules power the electron transport chain, which is where the vast majority of ATP is produced during this process. In total, 36 molecules of ATP are produced for every molecule of glucose metabolized during cellular respiration. 2 during glycolysis, 2 during the Krebs cycle, and 32 during electron transport. The suffix lysis means to split, and during glycolysis, 1 molecule of glucose is split into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, a 3-carbon molecule with lower energy than glucose. This reaction requires a small investment of energy in order to begin, provided by 2 molecules of ATP. In the end, however, glycolysis produces 4 molecules of ATP. 4 ATP coming out, minus the 2 ATP that went in, means a net gain of 2 ATP overall, provided by this part of cellular respiration. This part of the reaction requires no oxygen, and actually occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, not in the mitochondria. Glycolysis can provide living organisms with a very small amount of ATP, even if oxygen supplies are low. This process also produces 2 molecules of NADH, which, like ATP, carry energy. This energy will be used later during the electron transport chain, but the ATP produced can be used by the cell to perform a great many different functions almost immediately. The pyruvic acid produced during glycolysis diffuses through porins in the outer membrane and into the matrix of the mitochondria. Before entering the Krebs cycle, each molecule of pyruvic acid reacts to form a 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA, and a molecule of carbon dioxide as well. This process also produces a few molecules of NADH, which carry high-energy electrons to the electron transport chain. Acetyl-CoA enters the Krebs cycle by reacting with a 4-carbon molecule to form citric acid. Citric acid is gradually broken down in a series of reactions, each of which releases energy, mostly in the form of NADH and FADH2, which carry more high-energy electrons to the electron transport chain. This breakdown process also produces a small amount of ATP, which can be used by the cell to do whatever it needs to do. Eventually, citric acid is broken down into the 4-carbon molecule that began this whole process, and this 4-carbon molecule is now available to begin the Krebs cycle over again. Glycolysis produces a net gain of 2 ATP and 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. Each molecule of pyruvic acid produces 1 molecule of ATP during the Krebs cycle, so 2 molecules of pyruvic acid would produce 2 molecules of ATP. In total, we've only produced 4 molecules of ATP so far from that 1 molecule of glucose, which really isn't very much, but we've also produced a ton of NADH and FADH2, and these energy-carrying molecules are used to power the electron transport chain, which is where most of the ATP produced during cellular respiration is synthesized. NADH and FADH2 carry energy in the sense that they carry high energy electrons, which are released into the electron transport chain. If you recall, we learned about another electron transport chain when we were learning about the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis, and this one works in pretty much the same way. These large protein complexes we see here, embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, catalyze a series of chemical reactions that allow these high-energy electrons to be released from NADH and FADH2, producing NAD+ and FAD, both of which are recycled back to the beginning so that they can be charged up again with more electrons. This produces a lot of H+ or hydrogen ions as well, and the electrons released travel through a series of proteins, engaging in a series of reactions that result in these hydrogen ions being moved into the intermembrane space between the inner and outer membranes. Just like in photosynthesis, we can think of this as a form of active transport in which the energy of these electrons is used to move hydrogen ions from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. The electrons passing through the electron transport chain end their journey by reacting with oxygen gas and hydrogen ions to form water. And without oxygen gas present to complete the process, the electron transport chain won't work. This is why we need to breathe oxygen in order to live. Oxygen allows the electron transport chain to function. This creates a concentration gradient, with a high concentration of hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space and a low concentration of ions in the matrix of the mitochondria. This concentration gradient holds a lot of potential energy, just like the water held behind a dam. And just like the water held behind a dam can be used to power hydroelectric turbines that produce electricity, this potential energy in this concentration gradient can be used to power a different sort of turbine, one that turns low energy ADP into high energy ATP. The turbine, in this case, is an enzyme complex called ATP synthase. We've met this enzyme complex before, actually, when we were learning about photosynthesis, and it works exactly the same way here. As hydrogen ions diffuse from high concentration to low concentration, they pass through this enzyme complex, literally causing it to spin. This spinning allows ATP synthase to catalyze a reaction that turns low energy ADP into high energy ATP. Overall, electron transport produces a net gain of 32 molecules of ATP for every 1 molecule of glucose. This process requires 6 molecules of oxygen for each molecule of glucose because oxygen is the final electron acceptor in this reaction. Just like an electrical current won't flow unless a complete circuit is formed, electrons won't cascade through the electron transport chain if they have nowhere to go in the end. Like I said earlier, this is why we need oxygen to breathe in order to live. Oxygen allows the electron transport chain to function, producing a ton of ATP that can be used to power the cell. Glycolysis in the Krebs cycle also produce a small amount of ATP. 2 molecules of ATP are produced during each of these 2 processes, meaning that from start to finish, cellular respiration provides the cell with a grand total of 36 molecules of ATP for every 1 molecule of glucose metabolized by the cell. As was the case with photosynthesis, there is far more to cellular respiration than this relatively simple chemical reaction we see here. Cellular respiration is a series of complex, energy-releasing chemical reactions involving a great many other molecules, from energy-carrying molecules like NADH and FADH2 to carbon compounds that are cycled and recycled within the mitochondria. Most importantly, however, is the usable cellular energy produced by this process. Energy that can be used by the cell to power active transport, muscle contractions, and even brain activity. And we shouldn't forget that this process is made possible by photosynthesis, which produces the molecules necessary to conduct cellular respiration. Photosynthesis is how organic carbon enters the food chain, and cellular respiration is how organisms living in the food chain free up the energy stored in these organic carbon-based molecules. During these 2 processes, energy is transformed from one kind into another, from sunlight to carbohydrates, and from carbohydrates into ATP. Life on Earth depends on these energy transformations, and every cell in our body contains mitochondria to help us utilize the energy stored in the food that we consume. And with that, I will bring our video to a close. Thanks for watching, and remember, you can go back and watch this video as many times as you need until you feel like you understand what the process of cellular respiration is all about, and the role that this process plays in supporting life on Earth.